among many, many illustrious guests, I count the next two as really top of the top. Mattias Desmet, who scandalized the entire planet Earth with his book on mass formation, which I think you said, well, there's mass formation, and people said, no, that's disinformation, right? There's no such thing as that. Right? Strange times. And then Aaron Kheriaty from your university is not UCLA, was it?
UC Irvine.
UC Irvine. And mental health psychology. You're a psychiatrist, both of you.
Psychiatry.
Yeah, psychiatry. So
I'm a psychologist.
Brownstone gets us into many areas: economics, psychiatry. You know, God knows, right? I have some good friends here who have a nonprofit entirely devoted to getting people off psychiatric meds. And there, are you like this? I'm discovering all these problems I didn't even know existed, right? Just like a third of people are addicted to psychiatric meds. I didn't know. Then you turn on the TV, it's like whatever your malady is, here's a pill. You know, it's the world is crazy. You know, I think about this all the time with regard to pharmaceuticals. If you told me 5 years ago there's one industry in the world so powerful, they will, in the course of about 48 hours, shut down the entire global economy on command. Which one is that? I would not have been able to name it. Now, some people have been around for a long time. They knew the power of big pharma, right? I didn't know about it. This is a shock to me. It's it's more powerful than the East India Tea Company or whatever, right? That's nothing. Anyway, so thrilled to have these two gentlemen here. Now, the issue I want to address, especially from Mattias, who's come a long way to be with us, concerns something I think it's affected us all. And in our quest to understand, we toggle back and forth between two possible explanations. One is that masses of people are complete idiots. And the other is that an evil cabal imposed this on the world. I'm guessing that the real answer is some combination of the two, right? Not to give away the punchline, but Mattias, do you want to address that general framework for us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe it's important to consider a tyranny at different levels. As you mentioned, there is a tyranny of big pharma, which is the industry that represents in the most direct way our materialist, rationalist, mechanical view on the human being. Like the human being is a mechanical entity. It's a small machine, biochemical machine in the big machine of the universe. And the pharma industry and the medical sciences represent that worldview or their view on man in the most straightforward way. And that's probably also why they have this enormous psychological impact on society. In particular, because they are backed up by the oligarchs of this world, which is the first level of tyranny. I believe the kind of tyranny which was foreseen by Aldous Huxley in his book Brave New World Revisited. Not Brave New World, but Brave New World Revisited, in which he predicted that very soon we would live in a society which, under the flag of democracy, would become the absolute opposite of democracy, in which a small group of oligarchs steered society, helped by an army of mind manipulators. He said it was a very prophetic paragraph in which he articulated that. So that's the first level of democracy. I think, like these oligarchs which emerged after, let's say, winning the relentless battle, capitalist battle, helped by their perversion of the the financial system,
Yeah.
and afterwards buying politicians through lobbyists, politicians, congressmen who voted laws who put the oligarchs above the law, allowed them to engage in predatory wars through their regime change machinery, and so on. So that's the first level of tyranny, who is an important level. And I think that it's an important level, but it's the easiest level of tyranny to see and to understand. Yeah, but yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard you speak directly to that. And my little riffing on the power of big pharma, I did not intend to set the stage for that comment, but that's really alarming too. And so the idea is then that pharma plays into this kind of theory of life that we've adopted by default, which is that the human personality is infinitely gameable, and our biology is malleable to the point that it can be constructed and reconstructed and tricked by exogenous influences in the forms of potions and shots and pills. And the industry that produces those then gets an inordinate power over regimes.
And by constant software updates to the system.
Yeah.
I mean, the human body is a sort of computer that people who understand the world of tech and computers sort of, I think, bring that framework into something like, well, yeah, every 6 months they need a software update from the new mRNA that
Yeah.
print out. And that's the mental framework that's operating in the background. And yeah, the software on, your Microsoft whatever is infinitely malleable. You could change everything on it theoretically if you wanted to.
And I had speculated about this with regard to Bill Gates, that when he was putting together, the Windows machine, that the major thing that vexed him, that nearly ruined his business, was computer viruses, what they called viruses, right? And the way he fixed the viruses was with antivirus software. So this idiot,
He hasn't changed. He's still doing the same
so
thing.
now he thinks, well, I've noticed that some people are sick, just like my old hard drives. So I'll invest in antivirus software that can fix human beings. But I don't know if it's as simple as that. But what you're describing is actually more foundational. It's not just an eccentricity of one billionaire.
No, I mean, if I could jump in.
Yeah.
I think there's some metaphysical principles that were operating deep below the surface that were informing a particular ideology that formed the framework for what we dealt with. And one way into understanding it is, I mean, part of the ideology was scientism, which needs to be distinguished from science. Science is a set of methods to try to pursue the truth without, recognizing that those methods don't lead to infallible conclusions, and that you talked about Kuhn's model of normal science and paradigm shifts.
Yeah.
But scientism is an ideology that says that science is the only valid form of knowledge, which, by the way, is not a scientific claim. It's a metaphysical claim that needs to be smuggled in the back door because it contradicts itself. And then once you monopolize what counts as knowledge and you exclude other forms of knowledge, whether it's the humanities, whether it's moral or religious principles or whatever, you're on the road to tyranny and totalitarianism, because that's what totalitarian systems do. That's where they begin. Of course, once you get people to adopt the ideology of scientism, science can then present infallible conclusions to you, and we can of course anoint the people that count as scientists and exclude and vilify the people.
I'm very curious, and I hope that we can get to this point, because I have an intuition that everything has changed, that people are no longer trusting of the experts, no longer trusting of the science after what's happened. And one wonders if we're really we've entered into the last stages of this mythology of scientific explanations for everything, so scientism, if we really are leaving that world, because I mean, the fact that the shot did not work is actually devastating.
I mean, the methods are becoming more desperate,
Yeah.
clearly.
Yeah.
You know, in a perfectly realized totalitarian system, you don't need so many external controls toward censorship. I mean, Hannah Arendt, I think, talked about this. The end stage, people have internalized theology to such an extent that they're
Yeah.
self-censoring and the dissident thoughts simply no longer occur to them. And so the more external controls you had, and Matthias can probably comment on this better than I could, the less well the totalitarian ideology is functioning.
But I think the reason, Matthias, your book was so riveting was because it helped us explain the strange thing that was going on all around us, which was this the willingness to go along with absurdity. Um, we we all witnessed firsthand the instantaneous construction of a kind of rubrical liturgy over dining, where people would put on the mask to go to the bathroom, take off the mask to take a sip of their Coke, put on the mask and rest. And where did you learn all this nonsense? Or the new holy water of the hand sanitizer, which was everywhere. That stuff is disgusting. Um, and how instant it was that everybody, it was weird. It was a mass compliance, at least initially seemed like that was going to be the way forward.
Yes, yes, I believe that the absurdity of the corona measures and the willingness of the population to go along with it demonstrated the most important repressed truth of our Enlightenment culture, which is the human being is not a rational being. It's an irrational being, and you can accept it or you can reject that truth. If you reject it, it will return in a more powerful way. That's the absurdity. And we, as soon as you really accept that you are irrational beings, you start to understand that the guiding principle of individual and collective life can never be rational knowledge. It has to be something else. And that something else, inevitably or absolutely, is ethical principles. And if you reject that, that truth will return as completely erratic and absurd behavior, as we have witnessed, for instance,
Isn't that
in the
something?
corona crisis.
But framed under the rubric of morality, you're a good person if you engage in
Yeah.
liturgy,
Well, it was a new ethic.
and you're evil if
Yeah.
you don't
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
name of
I mean, 6 feet apart. How
sensibility.
dare? I mean, all human beings have to stand 6 feet apart from each other. What the hell?
Right?
They said this, and people said, "Oh, good point."
Yes, but what it's an absolute moral rule that is imposed there. You have to follow these rules. If you don't, you're not a responsible citizen, and so on. But I believe that truly productive and truly humane guiding principle is an ethical principle. It's not
Yes.
a moral rule. It's an ethical principle which you have to feel, an ethical awareness which has to develop and which only develops when you have a certain loyalty to truth and sincerity.
Yeah.
That's the point. That's the point of my next book.
But Matthias, let me ask you a question, because one of the books that I've always loved is a book by this guy Thomas Paine. You know?
Common
I'm
sense.
happy not
Yeah.
to know it.
Well, his book is called The Age of Reason, right? And so it was this classic treatise of late Enlightenment thought that believed that we had left the age of faith and we were entering into an age of where human reason and rationalism would govern everything. And the morality, the moral framework, as I understand Paine, was an idea called human rights, which seems like a good idea to me. But now that you're describing this, it seems like you're saying Thomas Paine had a overly optimistic view of.
I believe that we have to be as rational as possible. We have to push rationality to the absolute limit. And if we do so in a faithful way without falling prey to the enticement of power and money and so on, because that's what happens to most people. While they follow rationality, they fall prey to something else. But if we really push rationality to the ultimate point, we will spontaneously transcend it. We will get into touch with something that is supra-rational. That's what people like Einstein said. Like, the true scientific discovery is born at the moment you transcend rationality and you move to a stage of Einfühlung, which is a German term meaning something like feeling one with what you observe, where you get in touch, where you get a feel for the phenomenon that you observe. And that's the true knowledge. That's what samurai culture knew so in such a supreme way. They knew, like, you learn the martial arts through rational technical training. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but you become a master when you start to develop this feel for the martial arts, where your sixth sense is developed, where your intuition is developed, and that's the true guiding principle.
Yeah.
Thomas Aquinas had described the same things in terms of what he called connatural knowledge. So, if you want to know what the right thing to do is in a difficult situation, you can ask the person who studied ethics and principles and applied their intellect to the problem. If they've done it well, they will give you a good answer about how to navigate this difficulty or what's the morally correct thing to do. Or you could ask the virtuous person who's just developed the habits of living those virtues. And she may not be able to explain why that's the right thing, but she'll know intuitively. She'll have that feel, that what he called connatural knowledge. And I think maybe just as I drew a distinction between science and scientism, we can draw a distinction between rationality, the open and sincere and transparent and shared pursuit of knowledge, versus a kind of narrow rationalism that we got stuck in, that has maybe been bequeathed to us by the Enlightenment. Returning to our theme of tyranny, there's a 20th century political theorist named Eric Voegelin who studied the totalitarian systems of the 20th century. And he pointed out that the common feature of all those systems is not concentration camps, barbed wire fences, men in jackboots, secret police, mass surveillance, although we have many of those things, including mass surveillance now. So the common feature and the starting point of all these systems is the prohibition of questions. That the regime monopolizes what counts as rationality, what counts as knowledge. And if you raise your hand, you ask any inconvenient questions about
Disinformation.
It's disinformation. In fact, they don't even argue with you. They just, you're in a Marxist communist society. You say, I'm not sure about this revolution of the proletariat. It's going to lead to a classless communist utopia. They don't sit down and argue with you. Mattias, this is what you got wrong. This is why you don't understand. They simply say, you're infected with bourgeois consciousness. You're not worth talking to. You're not part of polite society. Shut the hell up. And if you don't shut up, that's when the external controls, then we're going to throw you in a concentration camp. We don't need those controls anymore now that we have a digital kind of gulag, now that you can be unpersoned by your bank and so on and so forth. But the starting point, and this is why the censorship issue is so important, because that's where these systems begin, and then the rest of the apparatus of control follows inevitably from that. So whenever we see that, we smell that monopolizing knowledge and that prohibition of questions, it should make us very, very nervous.
But really, from the very onset of the COVID regime, which is the regime, there seemed to be a systematic effort to replace our natural experience-based intuitions about right and wrong with something completely artificial and constructed.
Totally. I mean, you can't talk face to face with a person. So those elements of knowledge that happen in a real encounter.
You can't sing. Remember the attack on singing?
So it's easier to accomplish this in an entirely virtual.
If you sing, you're spreading the virus. And people began to see things that believe they were seeing things that they couldn't possibly see. I was in Hudson, New York wine bars waiting for a train or something, and I ordered a glass of wine, and she gave it to me in a paper cup. And she said, "Drink it out there." And I said, "But there's a perfectly nice dining room right here. Why don't I sit there and drink it, because it's rather cold outside?" She said, "Well, you can't because of COVID." And I said, "You think COVID is in that room?" And she said, "Yes." Right?
Yes, but that's how rationalism which for me is completely different from being rational. But that's how rationalism lapses into complete absurd irrationality,
Yeah.
and that you even can't laugh with it.
Right.
You're not allowed to.
Yeah, it plunged into a strange, my, mysticism, is what I observed. You know.
Right. And
Mhm.
I mean, what was held up as the highest ideal of civic virtue was non-participation, right?
Right.
And I mean, it was just this complete contradiction at the heart of it all. So what we saw was a kind of totalitarianism of disintegration and fragmentation before it was a totalitarianism
No
of
weddings, no
domination.
funerals, no
Mhm.
church services, no guests in your home of more than 10 people, because that will cause COVID to spread and so on, right? And I looked at all of this stuff for a very long time as a bunch of crazy, wacky mistakes. Stupid people doing stupid things. Uh, at this point, 4 years later, I don't think that that's a plausible explanation. It seems like there was something else.
Both, I guess.
Yeah.
Both. It was, of course, it was pre-planned to a certain extent. It's very well known, for instance, that totalitarian leaders need a lonely population
Yeah.
in order to be able to impose their totalitarian system. But once they imposed it, all of them, without one exemption, replaced loneliness by isolation. It's the first thing they do,
Yeah.
because propaganda works very well in a lonely population, and even much better in an isolated population in which people are restricted at the level of traveling, in which people are locked up in their homes. That's where propaganda works almost perfectly. And so it's the two, I think. I think to a certain extent it was just a bunch of people who turned completely stupid and blind because of certain psychological conditions in society, and at the same time, some people took advantage of that situation of the population to impose their technocratic transhumanist plans, which are just the ultimate consequence, like a technocratic system is just the ultimate consequence from the mechanist rationalist view man in the world. If the entire world is a machine and the human being a small machine and a big machine, then it's logical that it is led by a kind of an expert or an engineer
Yeah.
who just, why would you ask a democratically elected guy who doesn't know anything about the machine to lead the machine? Stupid.
Yeah.
It's a combination of the two.
Right.
As soon as you start from this rationalist view man in the world, you inevitably will end up with an elite representing this view man in the world, which believes that it should impose its mechanist knowledge to the population in a relentless way.
Yeah, and anybody who disagrees with that is a potential populist dictator.
Yeah, it's a reprisal of actually ancient Gnosticism in the sense that, okay, so scientism is self-contradictory and it is irrational by definition. So it can only advance basically by slander of its critics and the promise of future happiness, which never quite appears around the corner, right? The utopian society never realizes itself. But what you end up when you monopolize knowledge in that way is there has to be a kind of Gnostic elite that has access to this secret knowledge in the future. We understand the direction of history, and you, stupid plebes, are ignorant of it. So you need to be swayed by propaganda. You need to be controlled by coercion if you ask inconvenient questions.
Yeah.
And we can discern this direction of history. And so you need to sort of shut up and listen to us and go along. If you do that, you're a good person. I mean, ethics. I mean, in this twisted upside down framework, ethics by definition becomes, go along with us. You're a good person. Stand in the way of the direction of history that only we can tell you where it's going, and you're a bad person. Therefore, you deserve to be steamrolled.
Yeah.
In fact, because you're getting in the way of the future happiness that's going to come about when we completely eradicate this virus, eradicate classes, or usher in whatever the proposed totalitarian utopia might be.
Now, Mattias, one of the reasons your book was so exciting was that it seemed to explain the behavior of our fellows, and I thought it did so brilliantly. By the way, and before reading your book, I had read a wonderful book by Freud, and you don't like Freud. Probably you don't.
I didn't say that.
Well, nobody likes Freud.
I like him. I
I'm
like him.
Freud got some things right.
I'm the only guy who seems to like Freud. But anyway, not all of Freud, just something. But he wrote a book on group psychology and the analysis of the ego, which I think of that is a riveting
Oh, yes.
book that explained like so much. Like, for example, if you joined your local gardenia club, you know, and doubled the membership and are in charge of the newsletter and raise the money and whatever, but after a couple of years, you get sick of gardenias. Like, why did I ever do this? So you quit. Well, then everybody hates you. You're an enemy of the gardenia. Well, I served you faithfully for 2 years. My whole life is gardenias. How about some thanks? Nope, you suck. Right. So that Freud addresses why this happens. Anyway, so the point is that your book was such a brilliant explanation for the mass formation we saw all around us. Maybe it's just 'cause where I am, the people I hang out with, whatever, but I see something unraveling about the entire experience. And people, the fact that the shots didn't work has disoriented a lot of people. The loss of trust in the media, the loss of trust in government, the loss of trust in everything, really, seems to be a defining characteristic of our age. And it is roiling politics the world over. It is. Maybe not this time around, but certainly at some point in the future, we're going to have to come to terms. So my question to you is, in your analysis, in your understanding, your framework, is there a period in which this mass formation is it terminal? Does it have a life? Does it end? And then what happens?
Yes, there is, I think. I believe that, well, mass formations usually were short-lived, but because of the emergence of the mass media, they started to last longer and longer and longer, and because the population got more lonely, it was a complex dynamical phenomenon. But it's only recently, or at least throughout the last 150 years, that they started to last so long that it was possible to base a state system on it, which was this new kind of state, the totalitarian state, which emerged in the 20th century. So, but since then, actually, we live in a continuous process of mass phenomena, usually massifications, I think, not really fully fledged mass formations. And then after the Second World War, for the first time in history, this global mass formation, which was called the Corona crisis. So, but I do believe that it will end. At least the power of the propagandized masses will end. I truly believe so, because no matter where I come in the world, I've been in 4 countries in 3 weeks' time, I think, and everywhere I feel the same awareness emerging.
Yeah.
I feel that people start to become aware of the fact that there is something about truth, that there is something about sincerity. We are all going through the same process, and at a certain moment, we will pass this tipping point in which a small group of people, truly unified by sincerity and truth, not by the same opinion. They might all have a different opinion, but they will all be aware that every human being has the fundamental right to articulate his opinion. And that's what will unify that group of people. That's true love. Because if you only love someone because he has the same as you, or because he has the same opinion, then what you love is not the other. It's your own mirror image, and what you feel is not love, it is narcissism. And that's what is so typical for a mass. That's what happens in a mass. In a mass, everyone has to have the same opinion. Everyone identifies with the same ideal image. That was the major contribution of Freud in the text you mentioned. Freud wrote only one text about mass psychology, but he contributed one of the most important contributions.
I'm glad you think so.
He understood what was so unique for a mass, that it was different from all other groups, because the organizing principle is not love between the individuals, it's love of every individual separately with this one same ideology, ideal image. That's why mass formation and totalitarianism uniformize a society. So, and now we are in this metaphysical revolution, I believe. This metaphysical revolution where we see how a propagandized mass, propagandized by their leaders, emerges in its full strength. And at the same time, it provokes the emergence of its counterpart, a group of people who start to become aware that without truth and sincerity, there is no human living together.
Yeah.
And that is what we are going through, I believe. This process in which the propagandized masses slowly start to become weaker than this emerging group of people unified by truth speech. So everyone at every moment, no matter where, who speaks a sincere word, be it at the kitchen table in a shop or no matter where, or here on stage or during the break, everyone who truly speaks a sincere word and who connects a human being beyond the narcissistic shield,
Yeah.
who connects them at the level of the soul through sincere speech, contributes, or at least if enough people do that, the era of totalitarianism is over. It's simple as that.
I really,
Yeah.
I really want to disagree with you so that I know that I love you authentically and not narcissistically. But I can't help but agreeing with you 100%. Hopefully, we'll find something else to disagree on.
Maybe.
Um,
We will.
but
Uh,
just to riff and gloss, which I can't say anything better than what you just said. But you taught me that Hannah Arendt's phrase for the precondition for totalitarianism was not just loneliness, but organized loneliness, a deliberate loneliness. And in fact, our Surgeon General, who got many things wrong, it is a defendant in one of my lawsuits that I'm not a big fan of Vivek Murthy, but he was correct back in 2018 when he said there's an epidemic of loneliness, and it's as serious as cancer and heart disease for our health.
Yes.
And so we had this epidemic of deaths of despair really since 1999.
Yeah.
20-year rise in deaths by suicide, drug overdose, alcohol-related illnesses, which we already had a crisis. Drug overdose deaths in 1999, 20,000 a year. 2018 had gone up to 70,000 a year, which is horrifying. And then it jumped in 2020 during lockdowns from 70 to 100.
And you remember they said that wasn't going to happen?
Yes, no, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But it did, of course. Alcohol-related deaths, same thing, 69 to 99,000 in 1 year after the lockdowns. But that organized loneliness, that precondition for tyranny, was already present prior to COVID for a variety of reasons. Some of them, I would argue, some of them by design, actually. And so just to riff on your remarks, the remedy is the kind of thing that we're doing here. Propaganda doesn't work when people meet and talk and gather face to face. It works much better when with organized loneliness. And so anything that can be done to connect with real people in real time, in real space, will move us away from this rationalistic kind of hyper the virtual world where information can so easily be manipulated and our mental life can begin to conform to an unreality.
I feel that.
Hyped through the screen. So this what we're doing now is the remedy.
I feel that. Don't you agree? I mean, we had about a year or two of weird artificial isolation. And like even now, 4 years later, it's just a thrill to gather with other people and see smiling faces and shake hands. Remember when Fauci said we'd never shake hands again? You know? Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Yes, but for us, it is a pleasure to shake hands. For some, it isn't. Some prefer isolation.
Yeah.
They continue to work from their homes and so on, and that's what's so typical for the people who were into the mass formation. Will become more lonely. That's an inevitable consequence.
Yeah.
Because a mass formation sucks away all the energy from the bonds between people, and it all injects it in the bond of the individual with the collective. So meaning that the individual bond becomes weaker, people feel more lonely, and so on, and even more vulnerable for new propaganda, like the propaganda on the Ukraine war started immediately after the COVID crisis and so on. So the propagandized mass will become more and more lonely. But the people who do not fall prey to it, who go against it, will become more and more connected. And that's how the balance will shift, probably.
Yeah. That explains, I think, what we often call the rabbit hole. there's things I accepted as true 5 years ago that
Mm.
now I'm doubting. You
Exactly,
know,
Same with me.
well, I mean, just not to be controversial, but I never really cared much either way about this issue of climate change. You know, like whatever. I'm glad we got climate change. But I don't care. But it never really. But now, you know, soon after the COVID thing started, yeah, there was the Ukraine war, but there's also the climate. You know, it rains outside. So, well, the climate's changing. That's because of your standard of living or whatever. And now it's so obvious to me that the exact same models and techniques and scientific pretense of knowledge, fake data, rule by experts, all in the pay of the state, and so on, are in charge of that realm of thought too. So
For the purposes of accruing more
power,
top down
control, yeah,
managerial control.
and a reset, an industrial reset. I mean, it's so apparent to me now. So much has been revealed.
We are waking up.
Yeah, yeah.
We are waking up, and yeah, but I think that's always extremely important. We touched upon it while we were talking, but it's extremely important to understand that there is this tyranny of the oligarchs, but there is also a tyranny at different levels. Like at the level of the individual itself, there is also a tyranny of narcissism and the ego,
Yeah,
which
that's right.
also emerged throughout the last 200
Yeah.
years, and which interacts with this tyranny of the oligarchs. That's so important. It's like this materialist fuel man in the world. It focused our attention on the world we could see with our eyes, also at the level of our identity. It made us believe, or at least it shifted individual experiencing in that direction, made us believe that we could see who we are in the mirror. It made us identify more with the visible aspects of our being, and that's exactly what narcissism is. It's a psychological investment in the surface of our bodies, our outer ideal image, and that was the first phenomenon that isolated us from each other. When we focus at the surface of our being, we make our ego stronger, and we disconnect ourselves from the other human being, and that's the first level of loneliness, and it is that loneliness that makes us fall prey to propaganda. That's exactly what Jacques Ellul explains in his book Propaganda, where he explains about how the modern masses are different from the ancient masses because it are lonely masses.
Narcissism also produces what the analysts, going back to your friend Freud, they called it character armor. There's a kind of hardening of the personality that makes it impossible to actually connect, you know, with real friendship or intimacy or what have you with the person underneath. And rates of narcissism on the rise. I wrote a book wrote a book review on the book called The Narcissism Epidemic, which is Jean Twenge, probably 15 years ago now, showing data that narcissistic traits, not necessarily full-blown narcissistic personality disorder, but narcissistic traits were on the rise among college students over the last 20 years. Particularly interestingly among women, but among both men and women, but it was more strongly pronounced among women in the data set that she was looking at. And I think the effects of that were a piece of what we're seeing now, and social media playing a role in that, and the effects of technology.
This is an absurd format where I try to extract all truth from you in a matter of seconds. But all right, so you both have talked about this, for lack of a better term, tipping point where people gradually realize that the propaganda is fake, and that there's a regime telling us to think one thing that's really contrary to the intuitions of a lifetime that we were taught from all of our ancient religions, and we don't believe anymore. And this truth begins to overwhelm the propaganda at some point. So let me ask this of both of you. How close are we to that point? Are we talking generations or a month? Right? And then what is on the other side of it? I would like to live in a free society where people are decent toward each other and human beings are granted basic dignity, and we cobble together a good life for ourselves again.
I'll go first.
Is that possible in our time?
So I think it's already happening to a lot of people, but I think that process is going to be also limited by certain factors that are going to be hard to overcome, which, in my estimation, a real reckoning with what happened to us is another, I'm sorry to say it, 10 to 20 years
Yeah.
away. And here's the reason. I think the analogy, even though a lot of people are waking up, and very often it's personal experience. I believe this thing, I took this thing, and it injured me. I mean, we just saw
Yeah.
one of the vice president candidates in a recent interview describing his vaccine injury. And
Yeah.
so, that sort of immediate experience can wake a lot of people up. Amazing how many people that even something like that doesn't wake them up and they're still in
Yeah.
denial. But I think one of the difficulties now is I compare our society to maybe Germany after World War II in the sense that something terrible happened. It was global in this case and not confined to one nation. And a few people really actively participated in evil. But a lot of people, probably the majority of people, kind of passively went along and kind of at some level participated in a way that made them morally complicit. They pressured a loved one to do something they didn't want to do,
Yeah.
radically, let's say. Or they alienated their own brother by disinviting him to Thanksgiving dinner because of decisions that he had made. I mean, these are very, very serious things. Speaking of, ethics and love and the
And it
importance.
takes a while to kind of work through
Well,
that.
and so to recognize, for Germans to recognize, yeah, I was living next door to this place, and there was a big smokestack, and there was smoke coming out, and I kind of everyone knew what was going on there, but none of us did anything about it.
Yeah.
Um, that's difficult to overcome,
Yeah.
right? And it's going to take a society, probably a new generation of people that are maybe less complicit. And in this case, I think it's going to be the generation of people that were in high school and college who were most harmed by these policies, who in 10, 20 years, when they're hitting their stride in their career as business professionals, as historians, as economists, as psychologists or whatever, they're going to want to know, what the hell were you guys thinking, and what did you robbed me of 3 years? These
Yeah.
are the most important years of my education or my social life.
Yeah.
And I think my children's generation is going to want a reckoning with this.
Yeah.
I think my own generation that was so complicit in this, there's a few people like the people in this room that are ready for that. But I'm not sure that we're going to see the full extent of that probably until the generation of people who are in college are in positions of power and authority, and other people have retired or died.
Okay, so I'll be dead by that time. Do you have a last last word for us, Matthias?
I think nobody knows how long it will last. You can see this from different perspectives, I think. Like, science actually learned us that all complex dynamical phenomena are intrinsically unpredictable. Like, they literally behave as an irrational number in mathematics, and they have this strange characteristic of deterministic unpredictability, meaning that they are determined by mathematical formula, but even with a formula in your hand, you cannot predict 1 second in advance how the system will behave, at least not when it is in its chaotic phase. And we are going through a complex dynamical process now as a society, and meaning that we don't know. It can be over tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it can last for another 100 years.
Yeah.
And the point is, I think, that we actually don't have to try to know it. Because that's exactly where we fall prey again to this rationalist illusion that we can live our lives on the basis of our rational understanding, predict what will happen, and so on. The only thing we really have to know in the years to come is that we will stay loyal to the principles of humanity in a world that is at record pace dehumanizing. That's what we have to do. And the crisis and totalitarianism, it will last exactly as long as it has to last, to give birth to a new kind of human being, which lives from the soul and which reappreciates the value of truth and sincerity. I think that's the only point. That's what we have to stay loyal to, just keeping in mind that no matter what happens, we will stay loyal to ethical principles. Like Solzhenitsyn described how in the gulags, those people often survived, who no matter what happened, stayed loyal to ethical principles. He referred to this wonderful prisoner, what was his name? Ivanovich Grigoriev, I think, who entered the gulag sickly. But from the beginning, when other people stole his clothes and his food, he refused to steal clothes and food back. He refused to do it. No matter what the guards told him that he considered unethical, he refused to do it. He stayed loyal. In a world where everyone behaved in a beastly and inhumane way, he himself stayed loyal to the principles of humanity. He survived the gulags for 15 years, and when he left them, one of the very few people who survived them, he was stronger than when he entered them. And but even so, I think that's exactly in a society which started to believe that we should live this life on the basis of some pseudo-rational knowledge. We have to be the ones who say no. We will live our lives on the basis of ethical principles, on the basis of ethical awareness. That's the big challenge, I think, in this society.
Thank you, Mattias. Thank you, Aaron. All right.